If there is one experience that tests the patience of any human being, it is public transport at the end of the day. The bus was packed, not full, not with few seats, but packed to the level of, if someone sneezes the wrong way in here, half the people will fall like dominoes. I'd been standing for almost 30 minutes, balancing like a juggler so as not to bump into the people around me. My destination was still a long way off, and I had already accepted my daily suffering when the miracle happened. Someone got off, freeing up a seat. In a reflex worthy of an Olympic athlete, I threw myself onto the seat before anyone tried to steal it. The relief was immediate. My legs were finally resting, and for the first time all day, I could breathe without a stranger's elbow digging into my ribcage. But the peace lasted exactly one stop. At the next station, a woman boarded, well-dressed, full of bags, and with the typical expression of someone who has never been in trouble in her life. So far, nothing wrong, except that she started looking around with that huntress look, as if she was choosing her next victim. And that's when I realized she wanted a seat. Now, mind you, the bus was full of people standing up. Men, women, young people, old people, everyone huddled together trying to survive the journey. Only this woman somehow thought she was above the situation. Her gaze roamed over every seat, and it was then that our gazes met. And I knew, at that very moment, that she had chosen her target. She approached and stopped right in front of me. She crossed her arms and sighed loudly, waiting for me to make the right decision. But me? I just stared at nothing, pretending not to notice. Then her voice came, laden with a screaming impatience.
Aren't you going to give me that seat?
I blinked a few times. I tried to process what I had just heard. It wasn't a polite request. It wasn't an "excuse me." It wasn't even a "could you." It was a demand. There, I realized that I had two options: stand up and accept that some people really do think the world revolves around them, or sit back and see where it goes. I chose the latter. And what happened next? Well, the whole bus stopped to watch the show. She continued to stand there in front of me, waiting for me to feel guilty enough to get up. The bus was so packed that you could hardly move, and yet she decided that I was the one to solve her problem. Now, if she had asked nicely, I might have considered giving up my seat. But no, this woman had a presence that screamed, "I'm more important than you," and I wasn't willing to take part in that theater. Her impatience grew, and the dramatic sigh turned into a roll of the eyes. It was the classic, "I can't believe I have to deal with these people," as if I had committed a crime by simply sitting there. And then came the final card.
Men should be forced to give up their seats to women.
The silence that followed was almost tangible. The driver was still driving. People were still glued to each other, but in the small space around me, time seemed to stand still. Looking around, I saw some people holding back their laughter. Others seemed genuinely curious to see where this was going. At the back of the bus, a gray-haired man who had been quiet until then arched an eyebrow, interested in how the scene was unfolding. She kept her arms crossed and raised her chin, convinced that her statement had closed the matter. As if I should get up immediately and apologize for not having understood my role as the official public transport doormat before. I took a deep breath, trying not to laugh at the situation. Not at the request itself, but at the absolute certainty she had that I would obey. "It's full for everyone, isn't it?" I said, looking directly at her. That was enough to make her furious. Her face contorted in pure indignation, as if I had just broken a universal rule that everyone should follow but me. The woman threw her head back, snorted, and mumbled something quietly. For the first time, she seemed to realize that she wasn't getting the support she was expecting. The elderly man in the background continued to watch the scene with a discreet smile on his face. It seemed that he had seen this kind of situation before, and from the way he adjusted his posture in his chair, I knew he was about to make things even more interesting. The bus continued on its way, jolting from side to side, but no one was paying attention to the journey anymore. The real entertainment now was the ridiculous scene that woman was setting up. She stood there, not knowing what to do after her spectacular argument didn't work. Perhaps she was waiting for someone on the bus to speak up for her, for a group of public transport vigilantes to come along and demand that I stand up. But that didn't happen. In fact, what happened was much better. From the back, the elderly man, watching everything with a little smile, decided it was show time. He shifted in his seat, straightened his hat, and let out a comment that, the instant it came out of his mouth, made half the people hold back their laughter. Funny, I've spent my whole life hearing that women wanted equality. Now, it feels like we've gone back in time. If I could describe the scene in slow motion, I would. The woman blinked a few times, trying to understand what had just happened. A few people exchanged glances, like that moment when the gossip gets too good to ignore. She turned back, facing the old man with the same indignation she had used against me. But now she had two problems. The guy countering her argument was an old man. And if there's one thing people respect on the bus, it's the elderly. The whole bus had already taken a side, and it wasn't hers. The elderly man carried on as if nothing had happened. He looked out of the window, snapped his fingers, and let out a sigh. He didn't need to say any more. He had already won. The woman, on the other hand, was still standing there digesting the blow, which made me realize something very important. She didn't know what to do when she wasn't in control of the situation. Because, you see, her problem was never the lack of a seat. Her problem was that she didn't get what she wanted at the snap of a finger. If she had been a normal person, she would have quietly accepted defeat and moved on, but her pride wouldn't let her. And that's why, even after realizing that no one was on her side, she continued to stand there with her arms crossed and her face red with anger. The old man looked out of the window again, no longer caring. He had already done the job. And me? Well, I continued to sit, because now that seat wasn't just a stool, it was a trophy. After the old man's comment, the whole bus fell into that kind of silence that hangs in the air. Nobody needed to say anything. The woman knew she had lost, but her pride was still there, stuck to her skin like a coat too hot to take off. She stood still for a few seconds, looking around, trying to find someone to support her. But all she found was people looking away, as if pretending they weren't even paying attention. The driver didn't even bother to turn around to see what was going on. For him, it was just another day in public transport hell. Well, I was just enjoying my seat more than ever. The woman was still standing there, holding on to the support bars, pretending she wasn't seething with anger. Her face, once confident, now oscillated between frustration and discomfort. And that's when karma decided to act. The bus went over a pothole, the kind that makes everyone jump up and down in their seats, and those who are standing hold on so they don't fall flat on their faces. I, safe in my seat, only felt a slight bump. But she wasn't as lucky. She was taken by surprise, lost her balance for a second, and stumbled backwards, hitting the backpack of a guy who was standing up. The guy braced himself, looked back, saw who it was, and just rolled his eyes. If he'd gotten a seat when he got in, he wouldn't have had to go through that. But because he had decided to turn a simple request into a pathetic scene, he was now standing there, wobbling like a badly tied sack of potatoes every time the bus hit a pothole. A few more minutes passed, and, to everyone's relief, the bus began to empty. A few people got off, and finally a vacant seat appeared. She saw the seat as a castaway sees dry land and threw herself into it before anyone else had a chance. But now, sitting down, she didn't look victorious. She looked defeated. Her shopping bags were on her lap, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on the window, pretending that nothing had happened. The truth was that no one there was going to forget so soon, least of all her. After all that, the bus drove on as if nothing had happened, but the energy was different. People who had been bored before now had free entertainment to tell about later, because, let's face it, everyone loves to see someone arrogant get a reality check. The woman, now seated, maintained a rigid posture, holding her bags as if they were shields. Her gaze was fixed on the window, feigning an indifference that convinced no one. She didn't need to say anything. Everyone knew that she was brooding inside. The journey continued in silence for a few more minutes, until the driver announced the next stop. To everyone's surprise, she got up and walked to the door. In other words, she didn't need the seat that badly. The irony of this was so delicious that some people exchanged complicit glances. The elderly man who had ended her argument just shook his head and looked out of the window again. He didn't need to say any more. The job had already been done. When the door opened, she went downstairs quickly, without looking at anyone. She probably wanted to disappear as quickly as possible. When the door closed behind her, a young man who was leaning against it near the exit let out a low laugh and commented, like someone who wanted nothing, "That's a good one." The old man let out an amused sigh. "Some people just don't learn." Well, I just wanted to get home. But knowing that I had witnessed such a perfect public humiliation made it all worthwhile. The journey continued without further incident. The bus remained full, but now, without the tension that woman had brought with her, people went back to their cell phones, to their headphones, to their own worlds, as if the previous chaos was just another detail of the day. But for me, that seat now had a special meaning. It wasn't just a bus seat. It was a symbol that sometimes life gives you the right answers without you having to do anything. And now, I ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Because, honestly, some people think that public transport comes with a reserved throne. So, tell me, have you ever met someone like this on public transport? The kind of person who thinks the whole world has to bow down to them? If so, let me know in the comments, because I need to know these stories. And if you liked this video, you already know, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the bell so you don't miss out on more content like this. Want more unbelievable stories? Click on the card, and let's marathon. See you in the next video.